I'm very happy to be a part of this conference and share our work on selective attention during courtship. Across the animal kingdom, we see many examples of camouflage in which animals closely resemble their backgrounds. In many cases, natural selection has shaped the forms and colors of these animals to minimize their conspicuousness so that they can hide from predators or stalk their prey. In contrast, it can be puzzling to understand why other animals exhibit bright coloration and extravagant forms, because these traits do not aid in their survival and in some cases even reduce their chances of survival. Charles Darwin proposed his theory of sexual selection in order to account for these elaborate traits. Sexual selection operates through both female choice and male-male competition. During female choice, females can assess males and choose which one or ones to mate with. During male-male competition, males compete with each other for access to females and territories that females will frequent. Because of this competition in female choice, males in many species exhibit elaborate traits. And these traits can be assessed by multiple receivers. Both males and females within a species can evaluate them. And they could be evaluating different male traits, or they could be evaluating the same ones. By assessing these traits, both females and males can extract information that is useful to their mating decision or evaluation of rivals. The traits can indicate the health, parental ability, social status, age, or other qualities of the signaling individual. In this example here with the American goldfinch, an individual can learn about the health of this bird by looking at the carotenoid-based plumage and bill coloration, while if they want to learn about the social status of the bird, they can assess the melanin-based cap. The sensation and perception of signals is critical to understanding how they evolved, because this is among the first filter through which they pass. And today I'll be focusing on vision and how animals selectively direct their attention towards specific signals and cues. This concept of selective attention can be illustrated in a scenario in which a female prairie chicken must locate a mate. She has to scan this complex environment until she spots a male that she's interested in. Let's say she's interested in this male on the right, then she'll direct her gaze towards him. And she might approach him to get further information, at which point she'll again need to direct her attention towards relevant aspects of the male. If she were interested in this orange patch on his neck here, then she'd need to direct her attention toward that portion of the male. By thinking about selective attention in the context of sexual selection, we can begin to understand how individuals are using signals to inform their mating decisions and assess their rivals. I'll be discussing a project that explores this very topic using peafowl as a model system. Peafowl are native to Southeast Asia and have a lekking mating system in which males set up display arenas and females can wander among them to choose their mates. This is the study site where this work was done in an outdoor space with captive individuals. We used eye tracking technology to study the link between attention and sexual selection. Eye tracking is commonly used in studies of humans in order to determine where they're looking. In the field of advertising, for example, you can determine where on ads people are focusing their attention. We adapted this technology, though, for use on our birds, and you can see it here on a peahen and a peacock. What you'll notice is that the peahen has a headpiece here that's connected through a wire to a backpack. The backpack has a battery and transmitter that send off video signals to a nearby computer. The headpiece is what has the cameras that record her gaze. There's one camera here that records her eye, and another camera here that records the scene in front of her. These two cameras are synchronized and calibrated so that we can determine at any given moment where the female is directing her overt attention. You'll also notice that there's a patch over one of her eyes. Because of limitations in the technology at that time, it wasn't possible to record both eyes at the same time, so we patched over one eye to be sure we were getting all the information that the female was using. This technique that we used here is highly accurate in tracking where the female was looking, and we assessed that in some trials in which we presented the birds with salient objects and looked to see how closely they gazed at them. So So in the video I'm going to show you in a moment, I'm going to throw out a mealworm, and you can see that the female directs her gaze towards it. In this video and in future ones that I'll show you today, what you're going to want to focus on is this yellow dot. The yellow dot indicates where the female is looking within the scene in front of her. Also, in the upper right-hand corner of these videos, you're going to see this insert here of the peahen's eye. And if you're interested, you can look to see how the eye movements translate into her gaze. So here's the video showing one of those trials where we're looking at the accuracy and the mealworm. Her gaze is the yellow dot. I throw out a mealworm, she looks at it and looks away. So that was pretty quick. So I slow it down so you can see it in more detail. There's her gaze in the yellow dot, and I'm holding the mealworm on the right. I throw the mealworm out, and she directs her gaze quite close to it. So the eye tracker is doing a good job of tracking where the female is actually looking, and it does so with about 5 degree or so average of a mean accuracy error. So pretty comparable to other systems. So now let's turn to the main study to see how we can address fundamental questions about sexual selection through a sensory perspective. In these experiments, we trained the peahens to wear the eye tracker and then introduced them into an artificial lek that had 2 other males. And then we recorded where the female was looking as she was assessing those males. So I'm going to show you a video of one such female, and again, focus on the yellow dot because it indicates where she's looking. So she's coming up from behind the displaying male. He's shaking his wing feathers. And he turns to face her. She looks at a squirrel going by, back to the male. Looking where the squirrel was, not there, back to the male. Looking at the male, you should also be able to hear his train rattling. She's looking around the environment. Back to the male. And the male turns, you see those shaking wings again. So what we did was took these videos and analyzed them frame by frame so we could determine where the female was looking at any given moment. And we first analyzed the frontal male display when he was facing towards her. And we could create from each of those videos these scan paths indicating where on the male's display the female is looking. And you can see these scan paths match pretty closely with what you saw in that video, that most of the gaze was directed towards these lower regions of the male's display. And across all the females, we could look at the probability that the females were gazing at particular male display regions relative to chance. And you can see that most of their gaze is directed on these lower eye spot feathers, lower fishtail feathers, dense line of eye spot feathers, and the legs of the males. And we did the same thing for the backside and side display. Most of that attention is directed towards the eye spot feathers, fishtail feathers, and this dense row of eye spot feathers on the lower portion of the train, as well as those wings there. So why might the females be gazing at these lower regions of the train? It's possible that the females are assessing how wide the train is and how symmetrical it is. And this fits nicely with some previous work done in this species. And this work has found that peacock mating success is correlated with the number of eye spots, his display activity, and the length of his train. And this fits quite nicely with the gaze patterns that we're seeing here, although rather than assessing the trail length, she seems to be assessing how wide it is, which is actually highly correlated with how long it is. You'll notice that there were some other behaviors going on during the courtship display, and we wanted to know whether female gaze was related to any of those. So we looked at the train rattling, the wing shaking when the male and female were moving, and the distance between the male and female to see whether that impacted female gaze patterns. And we found that in fact it did. Females were more likely to be gazing at the displaying males when the males were rattling their feathers, shaking their wings, and when the female was closer to the male. To show you what that looks like for the train rattling, we can see that before the male starts rattling his feathers, the female spends about 30% of her time looking at him. Once he starts rattling those feathers, though, she spends, say, 55% of her time looking at that male. And even when he stops rattling his feathers, she's still looking at him at a higher amount than she did before that behavior began. And we see a similar pattern for the wing shaking, with much more gaze at the male once he's shaking those wings. This indicates that these two behaviors, the train rattling and wing shaking of the male, serve to attract and maintain female attention. So now, what's the role of the upper train? We've talked a lot about how females are focusing their attention on this lower train when they're right up next to the male. But why might they have all of these other feathers? What function might they serve? So this is what a male looks like in his native habitat in India from a distance. And you'll notice because of the dense vegetation, you can only see really the upper portion of his train. So we thought that it was possible that the upper train served an important role in long distance attraction, and took this observation into our captive population to find out whether females might be using the upper train as a signal that the male is present and a possible mating partner. So we created this artificial train of just feathers and a control with sticks to find out how females behaved when they saw these two conditions here. We released a female into a cage with one of the feathers or the sticks, and observed her behavior. And she made many more visits towards the side that had the artificial train. She was very quick to approach the artificial train, and she spent a lot of time near the artificial train compared to those control sticks. So this was pretty strong support showing that the female can use the upper train alone as a signal that the males are in the area and she might want to check him out. And I just want to briefly touch on some complementary studies that we did looking at male-male competition, where we basically reversed the experiment and we put the eye tracker on the male rather than the females. And it was similar, in which we had a trained male introduced into a lek that contained another male and a couple of females. And we performed the same types of analyses, in which we looked at how the males were directing their gaze when they were, in this case, assessing their rivals. And for the frontal display, we found that these were an example of a scan path from a male, with a lot of the gaze, once again, just like the females, directed towards the lower portion of the male display. And similar pattern here for the backside, where a lot of that attention is the lower portions of the display. Looking as a comparison between the males and the females, you can see that they are quite similar in how they are assessing these displaying males, whether as a potential mating partner or as a rival. And why might males be gazing at these lower portions as well? This is also consistent with previous work done in this species, showing that peacocks that have longer trains and tarsi are more successful against other males. And they might also be spending a lot of time looking at the body, because they're monitoring possible aggressive actions on the part of the displaying male. So overall, we found that males and females are primarily gazing at these lower display regions, and the rattling and shaking serve to attract and maintain female attention. These scan paths suggest that both of the males and the females seem to be evaluating the width or the symmetry of the trains, which is consistent with previous work done in this species. And the males in particular might be monitoring the bodies of their rivals so that they could quickly respond to any possible threats. More broadly, this work hopefully showed that sensory ecology is very useful to understanding animal behavior, and these male traits can be used by both of the sexes in evaluating either possible mates or possible rivals. These male traits, too, can be used at different stages of the courtship process, either up close or at a distance. And lastly, we see that there's an interaction between visual and auditory traits. With that, I'd like to thank my collaborators on this project, as well as our funding sources. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or have any comments.